Good morning and welcome. This is Megan Mansfield from Accordant Company. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar from AvidXchange titled TimberScan with Automated Vendor Payments for Sage 300 CRE. Our presenter today is Mike Carbino, Senior Product Director at AvidXchange. Before we get started, I want to address a few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted for a clean listening experience. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions box. We will collect the questions and address them at the end of the session. For the best viewing experience, please maximize your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be provided via email. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Megan. Good morning, everyone. This morning we are going to talk about TimberScan, the AP workflow solution for Sage 300 CRE. Also wanted to thank Megan and everyone at Accordant Company for giving us this opportunity. We have had a long-standing relationship together, working together on multiple fronts, but there are many Accordant Company clients who are using TimberScan today. So once we're finished, I know along with any follow-up, if you're interested in speaking with clients about their experience with TimberScan, I'm sure that we can provide that information. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with a brief PowerPoint presentation. There are not many slides at all. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, quite honestly. I like to get right into the product, but I wanted to just kind of set things up and let everyone have a chance to kind of see where we're going to go with the presentation today. So with that, let's get to slide 2. Okay, so AvidXchange. Who is Avid? So AvidXchange is a company that started in 2000, so we've been around quite a while, have 1,600 employees, 7 offices across the US. We have over 8,000 customers. So there are a number of different accounting systems that we integrate with and a number of suppliers, because one of the things we're going to talk about today is purchase to pay. And that's the slide I'm going to get to next. But just think of Avid as the AP workflow and payment solution for, for your needs, just in general. And speaking of that, I want to talk for a second about purchase to pay. This is the reason I refer to TimberScan as a purchase to pay solution, is because we are able to, within our application, manage the entire AP workflow process. From the point in which the invoice arrives at your door through the payment process, TimberScan has tools to be able to manage all of that. So it starts with the purchase itself and what was purchased. And once that is determined, then we determine what we've received. So from that perspective, we're now, let's say we've reached the point where we've received an invoice. And once we receive that invoice, now we're starting to take that kind of deeper look at, does it match the purchase order? Does it match the receiver? And can we start processing this invoice? We want to know who approved the billing and how was it costed. So if that is the, in many cases, we want to be able to take the invoice, we want to get it off to the approvers. We want the approvers to do their thing and review it and perhaps put any cost coding associated with it. And then once they've finished their coding, that data will update Sage 300 CRE. And then we're at the point where let's say you're ready to start executing payment or checks. Then we want to know what's the payment status, and we want to know how is it paid. So what TimberScan does is it covers all 7 of these steps. I don't know why this number 4 here seems to have disappeared on me, but basically what TimberScan does is it will manage this entire process and allow for the ability to see everything that's associated with an invoice transaction. And now, oh, there we go, finally. All right, so now here's the final PowerPoint slide that I wanted to cover. And the reason I like to cover this is because basically, if you can just kind of picture in your mind these workflow steps, this is basically the concept or the process that I'm going to follow when I go into the application in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door, and we're going to talk about how that invoice gets into TimberScan. We won't spend a lot of time here, just enough so that you get the idea in the sense that there are a number of different options with which you can choose. But once the invoices get acquired, they're going to go off to initial data entry. The way that our workflow is built, we don't send invoices directly to approvers from the point that they arrive. We bring them into accounting, into accounts payable, and we start the AP invoice entry process in TimberScan. Then it gets sent off to the approvers. The approvers come into TimberScan. They're going to go through their approval process. Once it's been approved, we have this final review step designed primarily because most companies want to have someone, and a lot of times it's someone in accounting, take that final look at the invoices after they've gone through the approvals and they've been coded before we send it off to Sage 300 CRE as a final invoice. So it gets into Sage 300 CRE. There's nothing else from an entry perspective that needs to take place. The only thing you have to do here is you just go ahead and post it, and then your financials are updated. Not only does it send over the data, it also sends over the images. So you're going to see me go into Sage 300, and I'll show you an example of an invoice that's been updated, and you'll see the attachments that are associated with it. Now, once the payment process is done, then we're going to talk about that, or excuse me, that invoice process is done. Then we're going to talk about that final step, which is really how we're going to go about managing the payments. I'll talk to you about some options that you can choose, but the whole idea and the whole concept here is to automate that entire AP experience from purchase to pay. And you have a lot of options with which you can choose to do that. So given that, let's go ahead and get out of the PowerPoint and let's go into the application. I've already logged into TimberScan. I've done this in a couple of different formats. So I'm going to start by showing you TimberScan here. And basically, the navigation of TimberScan is very, very easy, very straightforward. So you see you have these menu items here across the top. As you select any of these, for example, I choose the reports menu. Notice how it then brings up and displays all of my reports that I have available to me. And then if I were to choose any report, it then would pop up that report dialog into the lower body of the application. So it's very easy to navigate through TimberScan, very user-friendly system. I'm also, before we actually jump into the workflow, just wanted to touch on the fact that throughout the application, wherever I go, there are a number of different dashboard options that are available. This just happens to be one that I've chosen for this particular display. And what it's doing is it's allowing me to see, certain things like invoices by vendor, for example, by job, by days to discount. Now over here on the right-hand side, I have a library of different things that I could choose if I wanted to see them. These just happen to be the ones that I picked, and I have these 6 dashboard widgets here. Also notice as I hover the mouse on the pie chart how it starts to display these tooltips that will tell me, for example, the number of invoices for that particular vendor, the dollar amount, same thing with job or what have you. And then on these tabs that you see here, these are detail tabs, meaning if I were to click here, I would actually go right into that Weber's invoice, and I could process that invoice right from here. Okay, enough about dashboards. I just wanted to highlight that for a second, just from the perspective of there are a number of tools that are available to you that are literally right at your fingertips inside of TimberScan. And that's really the point. What we don't want to have to do is spend a lot of time kind of searching around for information and scrambling. We want it to be able to kind of be right at our access. And I think that's one of the things that you'll see and we'll highlight about TimberScan is how easy it is to access information for us to be able to use in our workflow process. Okay, so invoice arrives at our door. How do we get it into TimberScan? We choose this acquire function, And then we're going to choose the option Acquire Images. It opens up this viewer. All right, so several ways that you can go about acquiring an invoice. You can drag and drop a document. So if I had something that was sitting on my desktop, something that was in a folder, maybe an email that came in that I want to grab the attachment, I can just go ahead, I'll just drag and drop this particular document here that's sitting on my desktop, whatever it happens to be. And it will open up that particular document into the viewer like you see with the various succeeding pages to that document over here in the thumbnail view. So what I'm able to do is from this screen, I can scroll up and down the thumbnail and I can, highlight or look at those various pages as I'm going through and kind of parsing through this particular document. Now, if a vendor happens to send you multiple invoices in one PDF, you can separate them very easily. You can either click on this document called Mark as New Invoice, or you can just right click. You can say, I want to insert a break, and notice how it just separated those two pages. Okay, so drag and drop is one option. Let's go ahead and get out of there. And let's talk about a couple of other things. Invoices that arrive in the mail. To get those into the system, what you would do is you're going to put them onto your scanning device. You're going to scan to a TimberScan file. So we'll set this up. And the routine will be you scan to your TimberScan file. And then in here, all you do is hit the Open File button. Those scanned invoices are sitting in that TimberScan file, and you just go ahead and pull them into the system. So you can pull an entire batch. You don't have to start scanning one at a time or anything like that. Now, the other option is that TimberScan does have an email monitoring tool associated with it. So what it does is it will go out and it will watch a designated AP email address, and it will take the attachment from the email and it will drop it into an email file for you. So what's the advantage of that? Okay, so the advantage is that I don't have to constantly monitor an email address and constantly take every email invoice and drag and drop it into this acquire screen one at a time or anything like that. Behind the scenes, the system has just gone through and it's just grabbing those attachments and it's dropping them into a file. So basically, it's doing what I would have to do manually. And then all I have to do here is I just open up that file. Those emailed invoices are sitting here, and I can just grab this whole batch all at the same time, and it goes ahead and pulls them all into the viewer at the same time. Now, there have been questions about, well, do other documents get in there? Yes, we don't have a way of being able to designate or discern what came in from an attachment perspective, if it was an invoice or it may be something else. All we're doing is we're saying when we see an attachment in that AP file, we're going to take it and we're going to drop, or that AP email address, we're going to take it, we're going to drop it into a file. Now, it just saves that amount of time. You go into the file. If you do see something that came in that wasn't supposed to be in there, fine, just go ahead and delete it out of that particular file before you acquire. Okay, last step here. Invoices are now compiled here into the viewer, and I can use the zoom in and zoom out if I want to. You can also use the wheel of your mouse. You notice how I'm just making the invoice larger or smaller on the screen. Makes it very simple and easy to be able to just size it here. But the final piece of the puzzle here is I've brought my invoices into the viewer. I'm ready to go ahead and acquire them. So now I have to determine who's going to get assigned those invoices. Now remember, thinking back to the PowerPoint slide for a moment, we don't send the invoices off to the approvers yet. They're going to go to AP invoice entry first. So your data entry group is your person or group of people that would get assigned those invoices first in AP. They're going to pick them up and they'll start entering them before they get sent off to the approvers. You can have multiple people here, multiple groups. I've just picked this, this is my data entry person or group that I want to assign these invoices to. And then when you hit process, those invoices come out of the viewer and they get sent off to this person or group, and they're going to go ahead and pick them up and start entering them in TimberScan. And that's where we're going to go next. Okay, so the acquire step is done. we're on to AP invoice entry. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time here because there is a lot to this. Okay, so here's the AP entry screen. We have an invoice in the upper part of the window like you see here, which again, I can size with the wheel of my mouse if I want. You have the data entry grid down here in the lower part of the window, and then you have a series of action buttons on your toolbar on the bottom and also up here at the top. So one of the things that I think is important to note is that the AP entry grid that's here in TimberScan is in essence the exact same data entry grid that's in Sage 300 CRE. What we did is we took all of the fields from Sage 300 CRE, they're in the exact same order as they are in Sage, and we pulled them into TimberScan and they function exactly as they would in Sage. I think one of the things that can be somewhat disconcerting about a particular AP workflow system is if it's integrated with a solution like Sage 300 CRE, but yet you've got a completely different AP entry experience than as if I were keying this into the actual Sage 300 CRE AP itself. This follows all the same rules and the same conventions. So if I start out here and I don't happen to know the vendor code for power equipment rentals, I can just go ahead to the list just as if I were in Sage today. And I'll just start typing in power equipment rental. It narrows the search and I go in and I find that particular vendor code. Now, all of the master files that you're retrieving in TimberScan, the vendor, your job, your cost code, GL account code, commitment, any of that, that's all coming directly from Sage. So basically the way that TimberScan is designed is it's like a layer that sits on top of Sage 300 CRE. And we just exchange data back and forth. It's like an extension of the Sage 300 CRE AP file with a lot of features and tools added to it. So we'll go ahead and choose power equipment rental. If you're using the compliance portion of Sage, you'll get these compliance warnings like you see pop up here. When I plug in the invoice number, if it's a duplicate invoice, which this one is, it's going to stop me immediately. So again, speaking to the integration with Sage 300, it already knows that we have a duplicate invoice. Now, let's just say I'm trying to figure out when did we process invoice 24011 for power equipment rentals previously. Instead of having to leave the screen and go out and search around, do an inquiry over in Sage or anything like that, I can just right from this screen click on the history button, and I've now pulled up basically a report of all of the invoices for power equipment rental. These are not just the invoices that are in TimberScan. These are all of the invoices for this particular vendor. This is designed, you can see it's got kind of an Excel spreadsheet layout to it, and it works similar to Excel where if I wanted to sort, group, sum the totals, even export this grid to Excel, I can do so. To sort, you just click on a column heading. So I just click on status, for example, and I just sorted it alphabetically. Notice how I've got some invoices that have been fully paid, others that are still open, some that may still need to be approved, for example. But what I want to do is find that duplicate invoice, which is right here. I see the original invoice date, the accounting date, when it was paid, if it was. When I click on the detail button, now I can see how that invoice was coded. What commitments, jobs, cost codes were associated with this particular invoice. And if I hover the mouse on the commitment, the job, the cost code, the category, it will bring up a tooltip that provides me with additional information related to that field. For example, if I hover the mouse on the commitment, you can see the original committed amount, any change orders, what's been paid, what's been invoiced in the balance. On the job, you can see the revised contract amount of the job and the job to date billings. On the cost code, you can see what has been invoiced on this cost code and how it compares against the revised estimate. Same thing with the cost category. These tooltips that you see me displaying here, these are available everywhere in TimberScan where these fields exist, not just on this one screen. And again, it speaks to the depth of integration that we went to with Sage 300 CRE that I'm able to go in and basically just pull this information up without having to go out and do any type of additional work. They're right here at my fingertips. Now, in addition to the detail, you can always call up the original invoice image. So in this case, here it is. I've called it up. I don't have to go to the filing cabinet and pull it out and notice that there's a sticky note on it. I'm basically in my TimberScan filing cabinet to pull it up. I see it here. All of my supporting documents behind it are attached. And then also attached to the invoice is something called the approval page. This is something that TimberScan provides for every single invoice once it gets acquired in the system. And it's an audit log that shows you every iteration of that particular invoice. When it was received and by whom, who entered it and when, who approved it, in this case, who was the final reviewer, and who posted this in Sage 300 CRE. Again, you'll get an audit log like this with every single invoice in the system. So with all that detail that I'm able to see, I'm back here. I never left the AP entry screen. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to append this. We're going to put in a dollar amount. We're going to go down to the distribution. I should also mention that you notice how as I start making this invoice larger and larger on the screen, how it's starting to get cut off by this data entry grid. You can always move this. So if I wanted to just take this and unhook it, I want to just slide it over, put it over on the other side of the screen. I want to put it on a second screen or something like that. Those are options that are available to me if I so choose. Let's come back here. Let's go down to the distribution. Okay. I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of how we can process an invoice, one against commitments, another without a commitment. So if I happen to have a purchase order or subcontract that may have been created that's in the system and I want to be able to go out and reference it, I'm just going to go find what commitments I happen to have in the system for power equipment rental. Go to the list. I have these two commitments. I'll choose the first one. And as I select it, what it does, it brings up the line item. This is only a 2-line item commitment. Obviously, there could be hundreds of lines here, but they're displayed on the screen. I can simply go down through and start checking off which ones I want to invoice against, or you click at the top if you want to choose all of those commitment lines to be able to be included. And as soon as I say okay, it's going to work its way through my compliance warnings here. And once it does that, I've now pulled up those particular commitment lines associated with this particular purchase order, for example, for this vendor. Now, in addition to showing just automatically populating the commitment lines from Sage 300 CRE here, notice how it also brings up this commitment summary on the right-hand side. Here's what we've committed so far, here's what we've invoiced, and here's what's still left in TimberScan. If the balance goes negative, you notice how it highlights that in red. I can always hover the mouse on any of these fields if I wanted to dig in and see a little bit more detail. But at this point, if I were finished with this invoice, I can just go ahead and accept it. And TimberScan will then send the invoice off to the approvers. And it does so based on the business rules that you establish in the system. One of the first things that you do when you implement TimberScan is you go through and just create these business rules. And it can be as simple as you want. It can also be extremely elaborate if you need it to be. So if we said we wanted to just route to the project manager on a particular job, TimberScan can actually retrieve the project manager credentials from Sage 300 CRE, and there's virtually nothing else that you need to do. But we could have a scenario where it goes to multiple people. Maybe there are thresholds, so we want to be able to, say that if invoice is greater than a certain dollar amount, then they need to be escalated up to another level of approval. All of those things are possible also. So there's an example of an invoice that I processed against a particular commitment here. A couple lines, I was able to pull them directly from the commitment, invoice against them, make any modifications that I needed to, and then I'm just sending this off for review and approval. Let's go ahead and back out these lines for a moment. Oops, again, one other thing I forgot to mention, it will display any overages if that happens to be the case like you see here. So I'm just going to go ahead. We're going to delete these lines. And we're going to look at a different scenario. So let's say I don't happen to have a commitment. From my perspective here in accounts payable, I do know that this invoice is going to be tied to job 03001, but I don't know how this is supposed to be coded. So one of the other things that you can do in TimberScan, you can partially code invoices and send them off. So I could simply go ahead and accept the invoice right here, send it off to the approver or approvers, and then they come into TimberScan and they can do the coding on their end. So you have the option. You do not have to have an invoice that has all of its coding completely done on the front end in order to send it off to be approved. Now, on the approval end, you can also restrict. If you said, well, we don't want our approvers coming in and actually putting in cost codes. We would prefer that they just put a note on the invoice or something to let us know, and then we'll do the coding, which is fine. You can do that. I could send this off. Approver doesn't have access to be able to put in cost codes. For example, they add a note to the invoice that says, charge this to cost code 5,000 or whatever. And then once they're done, they approve it. It comes back into accounting, for example, and accounting finishes the coding. So all of those things are possible. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other scenarios. So here's an invoice, as I mentioned, without fully coding. But you notice that one of the things that I did, and I just shifted my screen around here, but one of the things that I did, let me back out of here for a second. Okay. One of the things that I did when I went into that particular invoice is I completely coded that invoice myself. So I had to basically call up all the information associated with it, and I had to key it all in, as I was going through that particular process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use the optical character recognition of TimberScan and eliminate a lot of the coding. So the way that this works is, actually, let me just go to the next invoice, show you an example of this. And when I call it up, you notice how as I open up this particular HD supply invoice, all of the fields that have been pre-populated, the vendor number, the invoice date, the dollar amount, it even shows what job it was charged to and what cost category it's related to. So it did this based on the fact that I had set up an optical character recognition template for HD supply. So how that happens is that what I did is I went out, I acquired an HD supply invoice, and I made the decision that I wanted to set up a template. So in here, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to look at that particular invoice. And when I pulled it in, the program has these various fields that I can recognize, and I can see where is certain information on the invoice. So see how these highlighters here will try to determine, for example, where a field is located on an invoice. So in this case, it's sitting basically right on top of that invoice number, which is great. But if there were a scenario where I said, you know what, actually their invoice number could potentially be this big, or it might be smaller or something like that, you can always shift those particular highlights around. But the whole idea is we want to basically kind of find the information in the spot that it's located on the invoice. And then once it reads that information, it will populate the invoice entry screen accordingly. Same thing with invoice date. The dollar amount, which is further down here, highlighted in green, you notice. If I wanted to try and retrieve a description from the invoice, you can go ahead and do things like, highlight a field or highlight a line or something like that. And then you can also, if the vendor happens to put the job number or PO or commitment number somewhere on the invoice, then you can go out and you can retrieve that information from that particular invoice as well. Now, the OCR is a combination of a couple of things. It's finding certain information that's on the invoice image itself, but it's also a tool to allow you to set up defaults. What would be an example of a default? Well, if I'm processing an invoice from HD Supply, there's nothing on this particular invoice image that tells me what the HD Supply vendor number is. That's something that you created inside Sage 300 CRE. HD Supply probably has no idea that their vendor code is HD 12345 or something like that. But what I can do is I can use this option called invoice coding, and it allows me to be able to go out and plug in their vendor code and any other defaults that I want associated with that particular invoice. So now I'm reading information from the invoice image, and I'm populating with certain key, master file fields and those types of things to give me that complete picture of being able to populate as much of the grid as possible when I acquire the invoice. So I set up this template. It takes very little time to go through and set the template up. I now receive an invoice from HD Supply, comes into AP invoice entry, and it has everything that we saw before here. Very much of this has already been pre-coded. Now, you can always override any of these fields. If the dollar amount was supposed to change, nope, it's really supposed to be $20 or something like that. You can override any field that you need to here. The whole idea, though, is it's giving you that opportunity to basically take an invoice once it gets acquired, have all your, as much of your information already pre-coded. So there's not a whole lot that I need to do here. I look at this, maybe I need to plug in whatever cost code it's associated with or something. Or maybe I do nothing, I just go ahead and accept the invoice. So think about this. If you set up the auto acquire where I get invoices from HD Supply auto acquired through email, it takes me literally seconds to acquire them into the system. Then I've got an OCR template set up. You're basically talking about virtually no user interaction to get to the point where I'm now sending it off to an approver with everything pretty much pre-coded on the invoice for me. Okay, just a couple of other things here. You can drag and drop documents right to the screen here if you want, or if there are any supporting documents, they'd be highlighted and you can attach them. You can drag and drop an email if you want to the screen to attach it, or you can email directly from here. So if I needed to send any correspondence with, to anyone at HD Supply, for example, and I want to be able to, just go ahead and send it off, I can do it right from here, attach a copy of the invoice if I need. You've got a bunch of annotation controls here on the right-hand side, including being able to add a signature. If you don't want to clutter up an invoice with a bunch of sticky notes, you can just click on the comment tab and you can add a note this way and it pops up in front of the invoice. All right, so we've kind of exhausted a lot of functionality in AP invoice entry with a lot of flexibility, but yet an incredible amount of power that's built here. Now I'm going to show one other thing related to AP entry before we jump over to the approval side for a couple minutes. Now we also allow you to be able to process credit card transactions through TimberScan. So in conjunction with TimberScan, we have a forms tool that is, think of it just kind of at its core, it is a forms application. It could allow you potentially to set up whatever form you need to for whatever purpose you need to. An example of a form could be something like, for example, an expense reimbursement form. A lot of companies use Excel spreadsheets, for example, to that they've kind of created something for expense reimbursement. You could set up an electronic form in here, and it links with TimberScan and with Sage 300 CRE. Now, what I'm going to show you from a credit card perspective is, let's say that I went out, I'm going to do this very quickly. We're going to do this in probably 5 minutes or less. But let's say that I went out and I made a purchase at Lowe's or Home Depot. And what I can do is I could take a picture of that receipt while I'm there if I want, or put it in my gallery or do whatever. But ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to open up my credit card job costing, job cost coding form. And one of the things I think is important to note here is this is all cloud-based and it's all mobilized. So I'm here, I'm on my phone. There's an actual credit card app that you can download from the App Store, or you notice how this just basically right sizes to whatever device I happen to be on. Either option works. So I'm in here, I could say this is a Home Depot acquisition. It's for $80.70. Put in any notes. I took a picture of the receipt. I can just go ahead and I can just attach that particular receipt to that particular, to this form. Now I have my receipt attached. If I wanted to do any coding here and say, what the dollar amount is and what job or what cost code is associated with. If I do a search here, it's as if I were doing a search inside TimberScan or inside Sage 300 CRE. So it links all of those fields back to Sage, just like as if I were directly sitting inside TimberScan right now. Ultimately, what I'm going to do is go ahead and submit the form. There may be some approvals associated with this, but where it's going to finally end up once the approval process is done is in the credit card reconciliation program here. So you can have the statements downloaded from your credit card company. I go in here, I open up my statement. I have my statement items on the left. I have the receipts that I've received on the right. There are ways that I can go through and I can view information. I could actually open up the coding screen and I could code this particular receipt if I needed to myself here. But what I would do at some point is I would go through and I would reconcile the transactions where it starts to do a reconciliation and it starts looking at fields on the left-hand side where the statement is and starts trying to match them against the fields on the receipts side. Once I get this reconciliation done, if there are still some outstanding transactions, we haven't gotten the receipt yet, you can just click on the email button for any of those transactions. It will send out emails to the people that need to send in the receipts. So ultimately, they're going to go ahead, they're sending the receipts, we do the reconciliation. When you hit this transfer to TimberScan button, it will send to TimberScan invoices auto-created and sitting right in the AP entry queue in one of two ways. Either receipt style, meaning we're going to take every individual transaction, every individual receipt, and create a separate invoice, or it will go, statement style, which means it will take all of those receipts compiled onto one invoice for that particular statement, and the receipts will be attached behind it. Once it gets to TimberScan, it looks like this. Back here in AP invoice entry for a moment. We're going to bring up a particular vendor. That vendor happens to be Western Properties. So see what it did? The system automatically created this invoice. It's the credit card statement. It has all of the receipts behind it, and it has all of the line item information already pre-populated, already filled in, because that came directly from all of that reconciliation that took place along the way. At this point, with the way this invoice could be handled is it could be sent off to approvers just like any other invoice that came in from any other vendor. All right, we have about 20 minutes left. I certainly want to save a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Then I want to be able to save a little bit of time for that. So let's go through kind of quickly here. We're going to go through an approval process. Before we get to the approvals, I did want to mention, I highlighted the dashboards at the outset. Obviously, we have a whole series of reports and inquiries in the system. So if I wanted to just, do things like get a very basic update or understanding of what's outstanding, I could do a report like this as invoice status. There's 124 invoices outstanding, 1,000,003 in payables. And then these have drill down capabilities. So now I can start to drill in, I can look further, I can look at a particular person and say, okay, how long has Doug had these 7 invoices that he's sitting on? I can drill in again, and you can see how it displays all of the information about when they were assigned, all the details on the invoice itself. TimberScan has a notification system associated with it as well. So you can send email notifications when people get invoices. You can determine how often they get them. You can set up alerts. So those things are available. And one other thing I also wanted to show, if anyone has any scenario where you have to do substantiated billings for time and material, cost plus billing, maybe for a loan draw, for an audit, in the inquiry, if I do this job cost inquiry, now I'm going to say all dates, but you can imagine I could come in here and I could say, give me everything from January 1st to January 31st for this year. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, let's just do that for job 03001, because I need to be able to determine that the invoicing that we did for that time period. Now, all of a sudden, I've got this, what looks like a spreadsheet with all of the invoices for, for job 03001 with a lot of detail. But over here on the right-hand side, what we have are all of the invoice images for every single invoice. If I click on the report button, I'm able to simply come in here and say that I want to go ahead and download that particular report. And I could, just hand this off to an auditor and say, here, it took me, 20 seconds to compile this, as opposed to having to pull all of those invoices out of my filing cabinet. And if I generated a report off of this, it looks something like this. So here I have, here's my job, my cost code. There's a report on the front end. Behind the report are all of my supporting, invoices that have already been automatically attached. Okay, let's go to the approval side. I've logged into TimberScan in a little different format now, and I'm going to show you TimberScan, what's called TimberScan Go. Now, let me take just a moment and explain TimberScan Go versus TimberScan. Is there a difference? Well, there is, because of the fact that TimberScan Go is a cloud-based application that's set up in a browser. But it's not something that is that costs extra. It comes with TimberScan, and we designed it originally from an approver's perspective, because in this particular industry, as we all know, there are a lot of circumstances where approvers, project managers, for example, are not necessarily going to be in the office all the time. So we designed it from the standpoint of how can we get invoices off to an approver who may not necessarily be in the office every day, or may not come in the office very often. We still want them to have that flexibility of being able to approve their invoices. So I'm looking at this on my, basically on my desktop in a browser. But if I were to go in here and I wanted to call up my invoices that I need to approve, I could call up Power Equipment Rental. Notice how I could actually approve it right here on this front screen if I have security to do that. But if I call it up on the screen here, let's go ahead and change the format for a second. I'll just reset. Okay. So it's a little hard to try and completely simulate, but what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to get across is, I'm an approver. I'm not in the office. I'm out in the field somewhere, but I just called up this particular invoice for Power Equipment Rental on my phone. So I'm able to see the invoice, any of the supporting documents associated with it, and then I have these tabs at the top and the bottom of the screen that basically embed all of my action control buttons. So down here, if I said, you know what, I'm going to reject this invoice, I need to put it on hold, I can approve it, I want to add a note, I have the option of being able to do any of those things on a mobile device, the same way that I could do if I were sitting in the office and I'm basically back looking at it from this perspective. So again, just gives you the flexibility of being able to see the invoices from, in essence, from anywhere and approve from anywhere. So I had already highlighted some of the things that an approver can do. Obviously approve it, they can reject it, put it on hold, they can email from here if need be. If I want to call up my distributions, I can see how it's been coded so far. And then these tooltips here are, that we talked about earlier, they're embedded in here as well. So if I wanted to just click on the little inquiry button here, it shows me the tooltip for, that particular field. If I needed to add another line, or I needed to, make any adjustment or make any changes to any of these fields, I can do that. Maybe I noticed that this first field is an equipment category, and it's really not supposed to be. It's really supposed to be other cost or something. Notice how it also shows you those overages here for commitments and those types of things if need be. So if I made a change, I go ahead and say I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and then move back over here, and now I'm ready to go ahead and approve the invoice. I also mentioned earlier that if I'm an approver and I don't have access to be able to modify, but I can simply just go put in notes, then that's fine too. I can just go ahead and add a note, and then I would approve it and send it off to where it needs to go. Multiple approvers, as we mentioned, and ultimately, once the approvals are done, it's going to send those invoices to the final review queue in TimberScan, and then they are going to end up getting updated into Sage 300 CRE. Okay, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the approvals. I know it's important, but I think it's also pretty straightforward. The whole idea is I can do it in this format if I want on a browser. I could also approve invoices in TimberScan, and in the regular, what I like to refer to as kind of TimberScan Classic, where I'm able to come in here and I'm able to start processing transactions this way. Now, let me just, kind of go one step further with this whole idea of TimberScan Go. And hopefully I haven't confused everyone here. They're both TimberScan, okay? I could approve an invoice here in my browser, or I can approve invoices here the same way. Same invoices, everything. It's basically just taking the functionality from here and putting it into a cloud-based browser environment is what it's doing. So what we've been doing over the last several months, and we're going to continue to do, is we're going to take all of this functionality that you see here, and we're going to continue to build upon that into TimberScan Go and put all of that over here. Why are we doing that? Well, because some clients like using this. It's great. It's so user friendly. It's so easy to work with. Some people would prefer to work in a browser. And so we've already taken the AP invoice entry, the acquire, the inquiries, the approvals, all of that is now in this format as well. So now we're giving you the choice. Do I want to work in a browser, or do I want to work using the format that has been so successful and everyone enjoys the experience here? It's whichever choice someone wants to make, they can choose. Okay, enough said about that. We're down to about 10 minutes. I want to try and wrap up within the next 5. So let's say we've done the approvals. We've sent the invoices over to Sage 300 CRE. Let's go into Sage for a moment. Okay. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at, just for example, an invoice register. We're going to call up our friends from Power Equipment Rental for a moment. I'm going to look at invoice 24011. Notice the paperclip is highlighted. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to see the invoice. I have all the supporting documents behind the invoice all the way down to how that invoice was paid. So as I mentioned at the outset, not only are we sending data over to Sage 300 CRE, we also send over the images as well. So I could call up those invoice transactions and images over here, or obviously I could call them up over here in TimberScan and I can inquire about them over here. Now, final piece of the puzzle. We've now updated Sage 300 with the invoice. So we did all the workflow on the front end, and now we're ready to go ahead and print checks. So you would still, in Sage 300 CRE, you would still use your select invoices to payment option like you always do. And you would go into your print checks option like you always do. Now in here, there's one slight change that you have the option of being able to make. So what I can do is I go ahead, I selected my invoices that I wanted to pay, and I'm going to go ahead and print them, but we built a tool inside the printer setup called Print to Avid. What that does is it says, you know what, I'm not going to send this particular payload or payment, these payment transactions to an actual physical printer. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them over to TimberScan. We're going to capture them and put them in TimberScan. And when we do that, what it will do is it will look like this. Back here and go, we're going to go to our pay control system. So I'm going to, whoops, sorry, I got logged out for just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to call up that batch of checks that we were going to send to a printer. And instead of seeing them one by one on a printer, I'm going to look at them here. So I'm now on the screen. I'm seeing, here's my check, what looks like a check that would have been printed with the Sage check number. I've got my check stub, I have my invoices that the check is paying. And over here on the left-hand side are the invoice attachments. So here's that invoice 17,653 attached here. I've got all my supporting documents behind it, all sitting here. So think of this as that kind of scenario where someone has to print out a batch of checks, and then they have to take the check, attach it to the invoice and the supporting documents, and then someone has to go through and look and approve, sign off on each of these payments. We've basically just mobilized this. We made it so that I can just call it up on the screen. I can say, go ahead and approve, and it releases the funds. Now, when the payment gets approved, it's going to send it to the Avid Pay Network. So think of Avid Exchange as a financial institution because in part we are. So we actually execute on your behalf and we pay your vendor just like a bank would. And there are three ways in which they can be paid. They would be paid by virtual card, they can be paid by ACH, or they can be paid by regular check if the vendor chooses to. We don't dictate to the vendor how they should be paid. They tell us how they want to be paid. But what we also do is we manage this process from start to finish. So once we take control of this, you've now absolved yourself of check fraud issues. You don't have to maintain, any type of information about your ACH on all your vendors or anything like that. And you don't lose control because you're seeing and releasing the funds when you're ready on the front end. And then on the back end, we have the pay inquiry. And what that does is that allows me to see each payment that got released to the pay network, and I can see the status of what happened. Okay, here's the check number that was assigned. Here's the bank account we drew it from. It shows me it was a cleared transaction. If I needed to, I can produce a proof of payment document for that particular scenario. This also gets attached to the invoice automatically. And then I could also, if I needed to, when you click on the plus sign, it shows me the processing that took place behind the scenes that I can always look at. So if someone calls up and says, hey, we didn't get our payment yet, I can look and I can see where it stands. So it's automating the payment. It's automating the, so now we're talking about automating the invoice on the front end and automating the invoice on the back end, which then brings us back to the beginning of where we started of purchase to pay and being able to manage every aspect of the invoice from the initial purchase through the pay. We've got about 4 minutes left. Megan, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back, and let's see if we have any questions in the chat.
Well, thanks, Mike. That was great. We do not have any questions in the chat at the moment. I can open the mics, and if anybody has a question, we can try and help. So bear with me 1 second and let me unmute all. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Your mics are unmuted. No, I guess if not, we will then conclude the webinar. And
Actually, I do have a question.
Oh, okay, great.
My name's Lisa Taylor. I'm with Ton and Blank Construction.
Mm-hmm.
We do have TimberScan. We've had it probably 7 or 8 years now. One thing that I did not realize is the capability with the credit cards.
Yes.
Like with the Home Depot and Menards. Could you briefly go over that again, like how that works as far as taking the picture and that kind of thing? I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, and you know what I can also do? I have a video if you want that I can send to you that kind of walks through it. Would that be easier?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Is that something that's it's not like it's an add-on. It's something that we probably already have the capability of doing. We just haven't incorporated it. If we've got, you know, the if we have TimberScan.
It is actually an add-on to TimberScan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an option that you can choose to add to TimberScan.
Okay.
But yes, I will send you over the video that you can watch.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, sure thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
My name is Carol Caesar. I'm with Woodworks Construction. We also have been using TimberScan for probably 7 or 8 years. So
Okay.
actually, I have a two-part question. One is, now that Avid is discontinuing support for Piracle, which we use for check printing,
Yes.
is this ability to use Avid Pay already built into my TimberScan? And I just need to work with someone to get that going?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And the second question is, we've also had a number of staff changes, and is it possible to work with a consultant from Accordant or Avid or whoever is operating it these days, or Core, I'm not sure, to get our user settings updated and so on to the way we are today, as opposed to where we were when we started 7 years ago?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. You'd start with Accordant. Accordant has a staff of consultants that can help you with that, and we're always there to support them as well.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Today I saw the dashboard, never knew we had such a capability. Email monitoring, we are considering something like that. So there's probably a lot we could get from the system that we're not using.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And Accordant would be happy to help you out, Carol. If you want to, I can reach out to you, or you can send an email to services@accordantco.com, and we would be happy to help you.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any more questions? Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one more question.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Just very quickly, one of my clients uses Avid for payment, and they only accept one invoice at a time. So if I send them 10 invoices, I get 10 checks from Avid. Is that just their particular setting? Because I can't do that to my vendors.
Yes, that sounds like a setting issue. There's no reason why the vendor would need to be given 10 checks on 10 different transactions. They should be able to just execute one payment on behalf of those 10
Okay.
tenants.
Great.
Yeah.
Because your samples only show one invoice on a check, so I just want to be sure. Thank you.
Yeah. No, if you had 10 invoices, it should just make one payment. So that is just a setting issue.
Great. Thanks.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you make a change to an invoice in Sage 300, does that automatically transfer over to TimberScan?
It does.
Like a coding change or something like that?
Yeah, so two things. So, as you update, for example, you set up a new vendor, those types of things, it just automatically updates. We sync it back to TimberScan. But also, let's say that I made a transaction and sent it over to Sage. It got into Sage, and then, we realized later on the invoice has already been posted, but oops, you know what? It was the wrong cost code or whatever. So you made a change over in Sage. Yes, it syncs that back to TimberScan also.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, I have a question. We are looking to launch, or in the process of launching, Concur's Expense It program. And does this talk to Concur as well? Or can we integrate it with Concur?
We do have clients that are using Concur, and we have created we'll call it more of like a custom integration to Concur. So that is something that we've done in the past. We could take a look at that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
My name is Cassie, and I'm with Sirocco Mechanical Services. And I'm just wondering, how does this program interact with purchase order entry?
Do you mean, so as long as that purchase order creates a commitment, then we just pull it directly from the commitment. Now, if you're talking about the actual purchasing system inside Sage, and you're currently going through, maybe you're using inventory, you're doing receiving and all of that.
Yes.
That's the case. We do have a program. So you're still going to have to go through Sage in order to do your invoicing. There's just no way we can crack in there and get that intercept that invoicing process because of the way it's designed. But what we can do is we do have an import tool that would allow you to be able to import those transactions after they've gone into Sage. It's very quick. You just hit the import. You say, this is, I just want to take, invoices from this date range or something like that. It pulls all that data in, and it's as if they were keyed into TimberScan already. And then you can still process them the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, I apologize. These are great questions. I really appreciate everyone's time. I am going to have to jump off here in a second. I do have another meeting that I need to get to, but again, I really appreciate everyone's time, and thank everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
This
you.
has been a great webinar. And if anybody has any questions, they can certainly email me, and I can follow up with anybody. And if you have any questions, please absolutely reach out to us. And with that, we will conclude the webinar. And thanks again for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.